Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today we're taking a look at the Tangram Progression. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tangram is Kaiser's budget line, and so these come in at a really aggressive price point. They're only available, well, in the US, they're available on Amazon. Kaiser does have an AliExpress store, so you can get them there, although, you know, I really feel bad directing anyone toward AliExpress. Although if you're watching this in Canada, that's the only place you can order these, and that's where I got mine. And by the way, I did just order it and it came in. It took a long time to get here, but it had no issues at the border or anything like that. Now, this is a Dirk Pinker design, and there's actually another Tangram design by him called the Orion, I believe, that's a little shorter. And honestly, those are actually my two favorite Tangrams. A number of them, number one, a lot of them are too small. Number two, I don't know, a lot of the designs I'm just not in love with. So this one I really find compelling. It's of course a little larger. It's 8 inches overall with a 3.5-inch blade, 4.5-inch on the handle. Weighs in at only 3.9 ounces. So the size for me is right where I want it to be. In terms of grip area, by the way, the grip area is 3 3/4 inches, which is quite nice. Okay, and as I said, this is part of the, maybe I didn't say this, but this is part of the budget lineup from Kaiser. So these only come in at like $32, and I think you can maybe even find them cheaper if you wait for a sale. The end of the year last year, around Christmas time, I know a bunch of the Tangram models came in at a really cheap price point. Now, one of the things I feel like I need to do in this video is move this knife out of the way just for a second and show you the packaging that these come in. In terms of a budget knife, this is the coolest, most interesting package I've ever seen. And if this was, you know, a $400 knife, I think I would be really impressed by this packaging. So you get this box, and it's in a sleeve, and then you pull that out, and you've got a little cord here, and you unwrap it. There we go. And then in here is where you'll find your knife. In this case, I've got a coupon as well, but you'll find your knife as well as a microfiber cloth. And I've got to say, this is just really nicely done. The printing is attractive. This sort of whole little activity of wrapping this up is really cool. And, you know, normally in a review, I don't talk about packaging, but I have to say, this is like the coolest packaging that I have experienced in buying knives, except for maybe the Holt Spectre. I've got to say that Tangram has done a really good job, and I think that should be, you know, if you're buying a knife that costs, you know, $300, $400, $500, then maybe they could at least put in as much effort as Kaiser did for a knife that costs like 30 bucks, right? So I felt like I needed to give them some props for doing such a great job there. Okay, now let's go ahead and start talking about the knife itself. We've got a knife here with 440C Akuto steel, which is an upgraded version of 440C, and you will find slightly better performance. Now, in this particular application, we need to talk about how well this blade is done. So we don't have crazy thick blade stock to begin with. If I can get this to focus and actually show you. There you go. So we don't have crazy thick blade stock to begin with. And then we have a hollow grind on this 440 Akuto steel. We've got a bit of a swedge here at the top, but the main thing that I want you to notice is the thinness of that edge. It is really slim there. And so a thin grind with a thin hollow grind with fairly thin blade stock to begin with. This is a knife that cuts, and it cuts really well. And because of that, you're going to get extended performance even as the knife dulls, because the geometry is so nice. And so I've got to give a lot of credit. You know, this knife, for the price point of like $32, this knife does a lot of stuff really well. There are a couple little things, but even notice the sharpening choil here. It's really nicely done. You know, you've got this consistent edge all the way back. And again, you know, there are knives that cost a lot more that can't seem to get that right. So the blade on this, stonewash finish, 440C Akuto steel, hollow grind, really nice blade, very useful, holds an edge really well. The only thing that I wouldn't want to do with this is any kind of, you know, lateral force. I mean, maybe you're thinking to yourself, it only costs 30 bucks, so if you break it, who cares? And I get that, but it is fairly slim and a fairly fine point. So yeah, no undue stress from side to side on that blade, or you may break it. All right, other than that though, very, very good. What about the action, lockup and deployment? The first thing I've got to say is this has really, really nice action. It's on bearings. The detent is really, really nicely set, so it just flips out really good every time. The side-to-side play and up and down play is non-existent, so it's really, really solid. And again, guys, you know, why are there some companies who can't build a knife without blade play, even if it costs twice this much? All right, if Kaiser can do it for $30, then for $60 or $80 or $100, there's no excuse, okay? And especially, I'm just gonna, this is an aside, but people will often comment, I'll have a blade, usually from SOG, and it'll have blade play. And they'll say, well, that's because assisted knives always have blade play. And that is not true. One, I have tons of assisted knives that have no blade play. Number two, if you can't build a knife without blade play because of some feature you're adding in, then you take that feature away because you don't know what to do. You're not doing it right. Okay, so back to my back to my point here. You know, in a $30 knife, this is rock solid, and that I have to give a lot of credit for. The bearings are nice and smooth. It is on bearings, and so that's going to be, you know, some people are going to really like that. Some people are not going to like that. The problem that bearings present is if you're one of those people who is just going to buy this knife and never do anything to it, then bearings are something to be avoided because they do require a certain amount of maintenance. They do open the knife up to the possibility of failure when grit and grime and crap gets into those bearings. It can cause your knife not to work as well. So at that time, you'll have to take your knife apart, clean it up, you know, lubricate it again, put it all back together. It's not a huge deal, but if you are really, really not mechanically inclined, bearing knives are going to be a problem for you. The other thing is, you know, if you're thinking, well, I'm going to buy a cheap beater knife because I'm going to use it on a construction site or something like that, this is not a good option because, again, of those bearings. Now, if you say, hey, I want a really nice action. I want that really dialed in detent. I want that flipping action that's really quick and smooth. Then, and I don't want to pay, you know, $200 or $300 for a ZT or something like that that has a nice action. Then yeah, this is nice, okay? And certainly at a $30 price point to have that option, you know, I'm not going to call it an upgrade, but certainly it's a nice option, is really good. And by the way, I'm fairly confident that there are a couple of Tangrams that don't have bearings. So if you're saying, hey, I want something that's a little more durable, then there are other options that they have available for you. Okay. Now, I do have a couple of complaints here, two that really make me crazy. The first one is it is really, really difficult to get at that lock bar. Okay, so I really have to push in there in order to get it. And then the blade is hitting the detent. This is something that shouldn't be happening in 2018 or 2017, whenever this knife was built. Like, everyone knows this is a problem. Many, many reviewers have addressed it. When you make your knife, you need to move the detent ball high enough that once the blade clears the lock face, it's not going to catch on the detent ball. And this catches on the detent ball every single time. And so it does make me a little bit crazy. And there's no way to avoid it because your finger is in the way. So see, I can't move it any further than this while I'm unlocking it because the flipper hits my finger. Well, now I'm on the detent ball. So those two things are the big failures about this knife. And it is almost enough to put me off completely. But the price point and the fact that everything else is so good, you know, kind of means I can get over this. So I still have carried this and used it a lot. I still enjoy it. But you just have to know the blade is going to stop there every time. And you're going to have to push it past the detent ball. Okay, yes, that makes me a little bit crazy. Yes, it's kind of a fail that Kaiser should not have missed. It's a real flaw that, anyway, it's an obvious miss that they shouldn't have included in the knife. Okay, other than that, the detent is really nice. The action is really smooth. It's you know, the action is definitely better than knives of a similar price point for sure. Other than, of course, those two issues that I pointed out. Moving on to the handle, we have G10 over a stainless steel liner lock, 4-way repositionable clip. And so if you're a lefty or if you like to carry tip up, if you like to carry tip down, I should say, then we need to have a serious talk. Something's probably wrong with you. But if you like to carry tip up, left hand or right side, this knife is good to go. It's also good to go for tip down carry, although why would you want to? You do have a lanyard hole back here, and it's standoff construction, which is nice if you're going to it just makes the knife a little easier to clean and maintain. And by the way, while I made that point about bearings earlier, I will say this. Sometimes you can get away without taking the knife apart. You can just loosen the pivot screw off to create a little space in there, use some forced air, use some WD-40 to clean everything out, and then re-lubricate. And that will sometimes work as well. Just like other, maybe you've got stuff around your house that you use WD-40 and lubrication with after, like a lock or something you don't want to take apart all the time. So you can go that route also. Back to the handle. We're talking about handle construction here. I've got to say the ergonomics on this, and by the way, okay, one last aside. When I talked about, things that knife reviewers complain about, someone was really uptight. They hated when reviewers used the word ergos. And ever since that complaint, I feel like compelled to say ergos in every video. So the ergos on this are really, really nice. And for those of you who that word makes crazy, that's a special extra bit just for you. Yeah, it feels good in hand. The traction is really well balanced. There's no hot spots. It's not uncomfortable, but the jimping here that's, kind of below the edges of the scale here, it actually works. And normally Benchmade tries to do this and fails every time, but Kaiser has actually pulled it off. So you actually can get some traction from that jimping and even the jimping on the back spine. Although I will say for my hand, I normally hold this knife in this configuration rather than back here. All right. So yeah, are the ergonomics good on this? Absolutely. Is the construction good on this? Absolutely. Totally happy with both of those. All right, so let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. There are a number of knives we could compare this to. $32 though is a pretty attractive price point. We do have the Rat Model 1 in D2 steel, and I would say if you want something that you're really going to beat on, the Rat 1 would be probably a better option. The Tangram isn't bad, but you got a little thicker steel here, a little more robust grind, and overall a little bit more heavily built. Of course, the other thing is everyone's familiar with the Rat Model 1, so if you're familiar with the size of a Rat 1, that gives you a good idea of the size on this guy. Another knife I thought I'd bring in is the Real Steel Ippon. Now this is a knife that is not really in the same category, but it is, an overseas made knife that's on bearings. That's a reasonably budget friendly knife. Okay, it's going to cost more, but maybe worth taking a look at. Let's see here. I did a full comparison between these two knives, and if you want to watch that, you can go look on my channel and you can find a full discussion of this knife versus this knife. Both of them come in, I think this you can probably get a little cheaper. And so you'll have to decide which one is the best for you. This is, of course, the Firebird, I think FH11. Get that guy out of the way. And let's go ahead and bring in the QSP Phoenix. This is one of the knives that QSP sent me for review. And again, this knife, I think, helps to illustrate just how budget-friendly this is. So here we have an overseas-produced knife with bearings and D2 steel, and I think these guys go for around $49. I could be either 49 or 56. Anyway, whichever one is right, they go for around $50. And that's a good $20 more than this. And really, you're not getting a whole lot more in performance out of this compared to that. Now, I will say on this knife, I have a little easier time getting at the lock bar. And so that's something to consider. But this knife with bearings and a really nice action and pretty dialed in detent, it is hitting above its weight just a little bit with the action being as good as it is. So overall, what do I think of this knife? Well, look, it's a nice design, it's a nice price, it's a nice blade, it's a nice handle. The only miss are those two little hiccups in terms of, not being able to easily access the lock bar and the blade sitting on the detent ball. And yeah, those things, they're not good, but, I like the design. I like everything about this knife. So to me, it's not something that that's worth complaining about. To call it a bad knife because of that, I don't think is fair. So I'm going to say this is a really good offering from Tangram. It's in fact my favorite design in the Tangram lineup. And yeah, I would definitely highly recommend it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.